The Crypto Markets Update is brought to you by KuCoin, the best place to find the next crypto gem.
And of course, it's Thanksgiving or the night before Thanksgiving. What's a turkey in the market? Let's find out. Joining us now to discuss the crypto markets is Katie Stockton. She is Fairlead Strategies founder and managing partner and probably the most famous technical analyst since Ralph Elliott. Welcome, Katie.
Thanks so much, Lawrence. Good to see you.
Good seeing you. So you have a bunch of charts, and I kind of want to go through the Bitcoin monthly chart, and you have an Ichimoku cloud floating there on the horizon. I believe that's what that is over there on top. But it looks like support at about 13,000. Is that correct? So tell me, what's the interaction between these two here?
Yeah, so I mean, with Bitcoin, we have seen a major breakdown, and that was below about 18,300. It was a support level we'd watched for a long time, and it was holding for a long time. And now, of course, we have this breakdown, but we wanted to make sure to take a step back, which we always do also with the equity market, and look at the very long-term posture to just try to determine if this bear market cycle is still a cycle or has it become something that's more of a secular trend. And as it stands, looking at that monthly cloud model, which is also called Ichimoku. It's a model that was developed in Japan. It's really, really widely used and followed in Asian markets, and also anything that has sort of a deep global liquidity to it, FX being one of them. It's really adherent to this cloud model. And so for the cloud itself, you see that it rises over time still, and that frames what we believe to be a secular bull trend. The catch is, of course, that the cloud is quite thin, and that's something that sometimes indicates that it's easier to break. So we are not highly convinced that it's going to hold, but it does tell us that still Bitcoin can be considered a secular bull trend. Now, the secondary support from that breakdown below that 18,300 area is about 13,850, and a decline of that magnitude does appear likely over the coming months based on the breakdown that we've seen, unfortunately. But it would not necessarily mean that that cloud-based support is in jeopardy. So it wouldn't, as much as it's a pretty significant percentage decline potentially, it may not mean that we've entered this secular bull or bear trend.
So you still think it'll stay above that 13,000 and change mark, correct? Now, I kind of want to look at comparing Bitcoin with ETH, because this, of course, also speaks to a little bit of bullishness on Bitcoin relative to ETH. Is that correct?
That's right. So thinking in relative terms, we almost always see Bitcoin outperform when there's some skittishness in the market. And I think that it's fair to say that we've had some skittishness of late. And with that, you see a little bit of a sort of a flight to safety or perceived quality within the cryptocurrency market. So Bitcoin does better when both are trending lower in absolute terms. Unfortunately, the relative strength doesn't necessarily mean you're making money in absolute terms if you're invested, but it does show sort of a read on market sentiment. And we would look for Bitcoin to really outperform until this bear market cycle does culminate into something more lasting in the way of a reversal.
So you think it'll even break above that 200-day moving average resistance? Is that correct?
Yeah. Long term, it's actually a trading range, but within that trading range, which would have like a neutral takeaway, but within that trading range, there does appear to be upside for Bitcoin relative to Ether over the next few months or so.
So now I've got to ask you about what is always my favorite. You know exactly what I'm going to ask you about, what chart I love. And unfortunately, we don't have animation on it, but you know how much I love sector rotations. So I kind of want to show this up here. This is the rotations of the different assets. Can you kind of explain what the quadrants are and how they're achieved and why things are moving clockwise?
Right. So that's a relative rotation graph, and it's a normalized view of the relative strength for the various altcoins compared to Bitcoin. So if you can imagine at the crosshairs of that chart, that's Bitcoin, where it's living. Anything that's pointing up and to the right is outperforming Bitcoin and doing so with growing momentum, and vice versa. There's some information in what quadrant each of the altcoins resides in as well. There's sort of the leading quadrant, which is where you get the most sustained outperformance. The view that we have here is a very short-term view, so it's only looking at the past 10 days or 2 weeks or so, and that to us is just going to give us a sense of the next 2 weeks or so. So it's not a big picture, long-term view, but it does suggest that we actually have a very top-down oriented tape right now, and I don't know that that's news to anyone, but that's what happens when you see a bunch of these altcoins clustered right around the middle in the crosshairs like we have at present. That's when people are a little bit confused. They don't know exactly how to position, and they're letting the top-down information out there, all the headlines, drive their decision making. The only one that's really sort of on the outskirts, which is sometimes where the information can be from these relative rotation graphs, is Solana. You can see that it's coming up from what was the lagging quadrant, but it has this clockwise trajectory that suggests that as that clockwise movement continues over time, which it tends to do, you'll see it as an emerging leader in terms of relative performance.
Wow. Solana.
Hey, Katie. Zach here. A lot of green in the market today across a bunch of different assets. Is that, in your view, that the market sees that not another shoe is going to drop in the immediate future? What do you attribute this positive sentiment to?
You know, I think with the downdraft that we saw in response to the FTX news initially, I think it was about 27% for Bitcoin. We did actually get some signs of short-term downside exhaustion, and those are measurable for us. It's not just a feeling. These are actually from some of the indicators that we use on the technical front called the DeMark indicators. And on both the daily and the weekly charts of Bitcoin, we have these counter-trend signals that would suggest that we'll see stabilization, not necessarily a big relief rally, but stabilization for another few weeks potentially. So we actually have a short-term neutral bias right now in our research, despite that major breakdown that we've seen, which then suggests that we could get, another down leg on the back of near-term stabilization.
So, Katie, for those of our viewers who don't understand technical analysis, just to sort of, and I apologize if you've already said this, but I just want to ask this in very sort of simple terms. One is, how low do you think Bitcoin could go? And two, is there a certain price, like if Bitcoin falls under, it's kind of a free for all? So, and I apologize if you already said this, but if you could just explain this in a way that maybe others who don't understand technical analysis.
It's a fair question. We all want to know where the bottom drops out, right? And that would not really be 13,850 because we do have that cloud-based support based in the monthly cloud model to essentially bolster that. The hard part is to know exactly where that's going to live at the time that we're seeing it in play, if we see it in play, because it's a bit of a moving target in terms of the structure of that indicator. But think about 10,000. I have that in the back of my mind as the sort of next major level that could be in play below 13,850. I hope that we get oversold enough and for a long enough duration that we won't get there. But that 10,000 level is a support level. It has this psychological significance to it. It's very normal in markets for all securities to kind of gravitate to these big round numbers. So I would say it's below 10,000 where you really have problems because the long-term cloud-based support would be taken out, that psychological support would be taken out. But we do suspect that we'll see Bitcoin hold above that, hopefully closer to the previous support level, because we do already have this long-term oversold indication. It's just the catch is that these long-term oversold indications can be upheld for months at a time when you have long-term downside momentum, which is still the case.